Hello and welcome to this eSchool News webinar, Rethinking Attendance Interventions for Remote or Hybrid Learning. My name is Chris Hobson. I'll be moderating this event. I am the Custom Content Manager for eSchool News, and I'm excited to have you join us for what should be a very informative session. Today's webinar is sponsored by AllHere. AllHere is the leading AI-powered attendance intervention management system that combines evidence-based strategies with automation, analytics, and engagement capabilities in an easy, all-in-one platform for mitigating chronic absenteeism and improving overall student engagement and outcomes at scale. Before I introduce our presenters, I'd like to take a minute to go over some features of the platform that we're using for this webinar. Today's event will be recorded, so you don't have to worry about missing a thing. Within a few days, you'll receive an email message that contains a link to the recorded webinar, along with a PDF of the slides. You can submit questions at any time during the presentation by clicking on the Q&A box. There will be time at the end of the presentation for our speakers to address questions. Also, there is a chat function that you can launch by clicking on Chat. Feel free to use this feature to contact someone from the eSchool News team if you have a technical question. But please don't use this feature to ask questions of our speaker. If you have a question for the speaker, you can use the Q&A box that I just mentioned. With these housekeeping items out of the way, let's get started with our presentation. The presenters today are Joanna Smith and Hedy Chang. Joanna Smith is the CEO of AllHere Intelligent Attendance Intervention. Joanna works in the educational technology space to support school and district leaders to improve learning and life outcomes for K-12 students. She is the founder of AllHere. Hedy Chang is the Executive Director of Attendance Works, a national initiative aimed at advancing student success by addressing chronic absence. A skilled presenter, facilitator, researcher, and writer, she co-authored the seminal report, Present, Engaged, and Accounted For: The Critical Importance of Addressing Chronic Absence in the Early Grades, as well as numerous other articles about student attendance. At this time, I'm going to turn things over to Joanna to begin the presentation.
Hi, everyone. We are so thankful to all of you for taking time to join this webinar this afternoon. I want to extend thanks to the eSchool News team as well as to Hedy Chang. We have a lot of content to share over the course of the next hour, so we're going to dive right in. I see a lot of people are already jumping right into the Zoom chat and entering their names, where they're from, as well as their roles. Welcome. In a second, you are going to see a poll pop onto your screen. So we are curious about, what is your plan? What is your local plan for going back to school? Is it going to be 100% on site, 100% remote, or a hybrid mix? We have some information to share on some of the trends from a national context for what to expect for a back to school in what is a unique year at best for most. Also wanting to say happy September 1st. September, as you all may know, marks the beginning of National Attendance Awareness Month. So we are so excited that on the start of a month that for many helps to reinforce how critical it is to treat attendance as a leading indicator of opportunity and outcomes, that you are taking time to share and learn during this time. So we'll keep the poll open for about probably 10 more seconds and then jump in. And if you're calling in from a phone, you likely don't have access to the poll, but that's okay. To run through our agenda, so the end goal of this call today is to spark a conversation for what it looks like to rethink what it means to improve attendance at scale in this school year. We are scheduled until the top of the hour. And in terms of agenda, we are going to go over some national trends to keep in mind for what fall 2020 is shaping up to look like, and sharing insights about what the data tells us for a research-based ways to approach interventions in this coming year. Okay. We will also have time to share information on what it means to prepare for what's next, and should have plenty of time for both questions and answers. So why are we here? So according to an organization called MDR, educators report attendance and student engagement as being one of the top 3 remote teaching challenges that they face in the spring. And indeed, as many school systems are either starting class or preparing to start class, it's again raising that question of how do we take decisive action for against some of the attendance challenges that rose up in the spring. So for school leaders, 27% cite student engagement and absenteeism as one of the top 3 challenges that they face this spring. Educators themselves reported that it was also hard to do. In a session that AllHere did with SERPI, the Center for Reinventing Public Education this month, we shared research about how schools are preparing to take decisive action this fall. And what we found, and what they found, is that urban school systems are rapidly moving to remote learning as fall is upon us. When the locale is not urban, so when it's suburban or rural, it's much more likely that there are either in-person or hybrid opportunities being offered. For families who choose it, so for families who are seeking to have full-time remote options, the majority of school systems in all locations will offer a home choice option. And there are some improvements over spring. So for example, in the spring, only 21% of school systems offer live opportunities for kids to be able to learn. In fall plans, that number has actually jumped up to 83%. Many more school systems compared to the spring will also be tracking the proportion of students who are engaging in learning every day. So back in April, only 20% of school systems in a nationally representative sample were planning on tracking absences. In fall, that has jumped up to a 60%. And that's still climbing. So one of the questions that was raised by SERPI was, districts do seem to be better prepared for this fall, but when it comes to absenteeism, what does this data mean for teachers as well as kids? So for example, what is the plan to re-engage students who have disconnected in some way? And how can attendance data be used to support that work? Secondly, how will teachers be trained and supported to manage new roles? So if there are intervention asks being made specific to educators for absences across tiers 1, 2, and 3, the question has really focused on scale between lesson planning, teaching, grading, and as well as helping to re-engage youth who may have disengaged from class. How are teachers going to be asked to manage any of those roles when they have so much happening at the same time? Okay. So that provides context for some of the questions and that we aim to answer with you this afternoon. Sharing vocabulary quickly. Nudge. So a nudge means to give someone a gentle reminder or a push. When you hear the term AI is when a machine can mimic a cognitive function, such as the capacity to solve a problem, okay? And machine learning describes the ability of a piece of technology to learn without being explicitly programmed. You're also going to hear these three terms. So AI, so an AI assistant is a bot, usually over text, that can perform tasks or services, or in this case, interventions for a person. A chatbot is a bot that uses human language to exchange information back and forth. And NLP, NLU, NLG are the kinds of languages that bots can use to exchange content. So natural language processing. You are going to hear in a second me talk about some research, and the research that I'm excited to share is by Professor Peter Bergman. Peter Bergman is a faculty member who specializes in education as well as economics. He focuses specifically on how to conduct large-scale interventions that are at low cost. And one of the types of interventions that Dr. Bergman specifically has focused on when it comes to absenteeism is what it means to conduct interventions in a mobile-centric world. So what does this mean? So the time that parents, especially the parents of today's K-12 students, that they are spending on mobile phones and specifically messaging apps is at an all-time high. We know that 80% of the population has a cell phone, and an estimated 3,000 text messages are being sent every day. So it's seen as a quick and easy way to exchange information back and forth. Another reason why recent research has focused on the possible benefits of going all in on a text messaging strategy for absenteeism is comparing the data that is available for open rates. When you compare comparing emailing to texting to mail. So for example, amongst K-12 students and families, only 23% of families will open an email. And we know that gathering accurate email addresses for parents is very, very tricky. They bounce back often. And in fact, of the emails that are clean, only 6% of families open those emails on a day-to-day basis, okay? So it makes using email as the foremost form of interventions for Tier 1 and even Tier 2 somewhat challenging. Another intervention that's frequently used is mail. So mailing, whether in the form of letters or postcards home. What the research shows there is that 44% of families of today's K-12 students will open mail. But only 41% of those families will actually check their mail on a day-to-day context. When using mail-based interventions, it's also important to take into account how interventions are to reach families who may be highly mobile and not have one permanent address. When comparing those forms of intervention to texting, what the research shows is that in comparison to email, which has a 23% open rate, and mail, which has a 44% open rate, then 98% of texts that are received are opened. In fact, on a daily basis, the families of today's K-12 students are checking their phones upwards of 150 times each day. And if interventions are targeted to youth in a direct context, then youth are sending on average 74 texts on a daily context. Another reason to go all in on mobile is taking into account how the forms that we have available at our fingertips of communicating with parents and communicating with families about their children's academic progress have changed over time. So the first documented instances of using either a letter or a phone call as the form of intervention actually date back to 1962. When you think so much about how the population that we have has changed since then, there's Instagram, there's Snapchat, there's Facebook Messenger, there's Keek, there's Twitter, there's MySpace that still exists in some corners of the earth, right? The forms and the ways that are at our fingertips to exchange information back and forth have evolved so much. So it offers powerful opportunities to complement legacy types of intervention practices with ones that better help us to ensure that the right student is receiving the right intervention at the right time. So going back to the vocab, so we talked about the nudge. I'm also wanting to give a little quick context into the type of research that Dr. Bergman did. So Dr. Bergman did what is called a randomized controlled trial. What that is, it's seen as the gold standard of any research effort proving the efficacy of an intervention. And in this case, families or kids can be randomly assigned to receive one or two or more of a specific type of intervention, and that with other variables equal between those groups, on average, any changes in the outcome can be with a degree of confidence be linked back to the intervention itself. And this informs the power of what a nudge can do. So in Dr. Bergman's first research project with LAUSD, so that's the Los Angeles Unified School System, he found that 11% of parents did not understand an A to F scale. So 11% of parents did not understand an A to F scale. Furthermore, 31% of parents were not aware of how many report cards that they should get each year. Of all the kinds of communications that those families were receiving, 57% of those parents said that they were not satisfied with the type of communication that they were receiving from their child's school specific to their academic progress. And when you look at this is important. In the presentation that you will hear this afternoon, but also in your own reopening plans, you likely have information about how logins, course grades, and whether a child is in essence connected to their school is going to be used to arrive at a sense of whether they're present or not. But if 31% of parents don't know or aren't even frequently accessing that content, it begs the question of how do we expect families to support their children's academic progress? More broadly, Dr. Bergman also found that families have inaccurate beliefs when it comes to absenteeism. So he was able to confirm that families understate not only absences, but also the number of assignments that their child has missed. So for example, the family can think that their child has only missed 1 or 2 pieces of coursework, when in reality it's been 6 or in some cases even more than 10. And in the lowest performing schools, fewer than 10% of parents will actually log on to a student's online gradebook to check their attendance, to check their engagements, or to check their progress. So here's what Dr. Bergman did. He took information from the SIS and took information from the LMS and combined it to comprise 3 different types of alerts that went to families over text. The first type of alert was around low grades. The second type was around missing coursework, and the third was around absences in a specific context, with an emphasis on achieving the right wording, the right frequency, and the right data to maximize the impact. So for example, the text would be actionable, so including specifics wherever possible, like the assignment title as well as the class name. The text would also be sent at a regular cadence to keep kids engaged. And fewer than 10% of families actually opted out. So he assumed universal opt-in unless a family explicitly opted out. I see that someone answered or asked a question, are we able to get the PowerPoint and or recording? Yes, you will receive copies of both. Thanks for asking. When Dr. Bergman focused on providing high-frequency information at a regular cadence to families over text using information about absences and course grades, what he found was impacts in 3 areas. The first was that there was a 0.23 point increase in student GPAs. There was a 38% reduction in the proportion of students who actually failed their classes, and a 17% increase in the proportion of youth who by function of that course assignment data and absence data were now attending class every day. That research, we will make sure that you receive a copy of that source paper after this call, but it presents a powerful framework, especially since so many reopening plans are factoring in heavily grades and coursework in connection with absences to arrive at a sense of what student achievement and student engagement looks like. It's very, very relevant that this is exactly the question where Dr. Bergman focused this work. So what we've done if you think of extensions of Dr. Bergman's work to how can you couple the provisioning of academic content with, for example, on-demand help, so the capacity of a student or a family to ask any question and receive an answer. Joy, what it looks like to motivate students, especially during these uncertain times, with certain prompts that make their text messaging interactions fun, as well as proactive outreach. So not only waiting until a student is absent, but thinking about all of the steps in the student journey this fall, and how can we actively and proactively help families and kids to meet engagement and other milestones. And then Dr. Bergman's research gains even more relevance for these times. Of course, there are folks, so for folks who have a cell phone and access to either an LMS or SIS or both, it is definitely possible to implement this kind of intervention without the use of any external partner. So for any context that would want to launch this in a DIY format, you would want to do things like introduce who you are, to make sure that you have a clear way for families or for kids to opt out of text, follow legal text and guidelines, create a communication plan for the text that is simultaneously proactive and reactive. If doing this manually, you would also want to ensure to either use the family or the student's first name in some of the first text, or when you haven't messaged them in a while. It's also important to respond to the text in a very quick format. So less than 2 hours is ideal, but if a family answers your nudge text more than 2 days, will make it very, very much of a poor experience on their end. And also look at these texts as a way to be helpful. So communicating only that which is relevant for that specific student. The texts themselves are short and very, very to the point. And consider using a mobile messaging platform so that students' messages don't fall through the cracks. We talked about AI earlier. AI is a way to decrease response time as well as to increase the throughput of your team. And also consider how to make the text fun. So to use GIFs wherever possible. Someone asked a very good question. What is the risk level, if any, to student privacy by using text? Every school system likely has a set of guidelines around how text can be used to support a child as well as family outcomes. One of the things that makes this kind of approach promising is that it's research backed. There is a randomized control trial that's specific around using text in this way to support student outcomes. Another way to de-risk your text messaging strategy is to consider using an AI-powered texting platform. And this becomes very important because even if a district is enterprising and wants to get their truancy officers or their attendance teams sending these kinds of texts to support student outcomes, it's very, very easy to imagine a world where that quickly becomes difficult to scale. So for example, if you take the back to school season of September to the end of November, think of it as if you had 3,200 students who by virtue of their absences needed this type of intervention, you can easily end up sending over 50,000 texts. And if you hire a superhuman to manage that load, just taking 30 seconds per text, it can take up to 417 hours of just responding to texts and sending those texts out, which amounts to almost 52 days. In the same time that staff also needs to do everything else from hosting back to school events, taking a break, eating, and as well as preparing to implement both teaching as well as services for this school year. So when I talk about AI earlier, a way to think of it is your Iron Man suit, right? Because even though we know that teachers are superhumans, that they do so much, it becomes very easy to exhaust educators or even to exhaust your staff who is focused on absenteeism by having them manually implement that work. So what does this mean? We've prepared a short clip to explain how. Give me just a second to open that up. All right. So what is an AI-powered intervention for absenteeism? Let's learn together.
Smart mobile messaging for attendance interventions. AllHere, started at the Harvard University Innovation Lab, offers an artificial intelligence or AI-powered intervention system to reduce student absenteeism and increase student engagement at scale. The newly released AI virtual assistant is a research-based chatbot that automates support and supercharges staff to efficiently support thousands of families and students by providing personalized, two-way text message-based outreach and guidance for each task where they need support, with no effort from teachers and student services staff. On-demand assistance. Students and families have 24/7 access to personalized guidance as they learn, whether in person or virtually. Joy. The bot makes interactions fun and friendly through graphics and wit and is available day or night, even 1 a.m., which for some students is when learning happens. Proactive outreach. The bot can send information to families and students and get some in return. It handles repetitive tasks, collects data, and best of all, the more students engage, the greater the knowledge base grows, and the smarter the AI becomes. The technology is relatively new in K-12. Many other industries have had great success in using chatbots to personalize virtual assistants at scale. For K-12, AllHere can now help districts respond quickly to large numbers of students and families, and school staff are then able to focus on high-impact student support. This innovation was the promise for scaling personalized K-12 attendance and engagement interventions and transforming the relationship students and families have with school.
Let me stop that share and then transport us back to the presentation. Some of the questions quickly that have come up in the chat. Thanks for everyone who's been asking those. So one of the questions has been, what is an LMS? An LMS is a learning management system. For many folks, that's Canvas, Google Classroom, Schoology, or some other tech of the sort. A student information system is where is called an SIS, and it's usually where attendance data is stored. Taking information out of the SIS as well as the LMS and automating that means that if you're going with a platform to support this kind of text message outreach, that you don't want that platform to require the manual entry of any attendance data or any course related information. Double entry is a no-no. You want something that's able to automatically provision that from the platforms that you already have. So what we've done at AllHere is take Dr. Bergman's research and combine it with AI to create two-way tech for how chronic absence is presenting in these new ways. So you see a sample exchange on my screen. One of the things is that it's conversational, meaning that a student or a family texts and immediately gets a response. It does not require any educator input. So believe it or not, this is being run by what's called a chatbot. So it's interpreting student questions, interpreting student answers. It can be simultaneously proactive and reactive, and can be used to provide the right family and the right student with the right support at the right time. Okay, so for example, whenever a family is surfacing a barrier that's preventing them from being able to engage, then what the conversational AI is able to do is triage that and help to get them the right support to quickly re-engage them in class. So districts that are choosing to opt into conversational AI as a way to scale the best practices of Dr. Bergman are doing so with the goal of engaging students, engaging families, to reestablish what it means to learn at scale and reduce the burden on staff, saving time for the most meaningful of interactions, and ensure that the right support is reaching the right student at the right time. Someone's asking, is the chat customized to school procedures and practices? Yes. So every chat bot is created and built and trained specifically to that school system. Another question, do you inform parents or students that they're communicating with a bot or AI? And yes, that's actually the most fun part. So the first AI-enabled chatbot for chronic absenteeism is launching in Prince George's County in Maryland. And that chatbot is named Jarvis. The families and students know that it is a bot. So you don't want the bot to pretend to be a human. But what giving the bot a persona and a name does is create a context where families and students feel very comfortable talking with that bot as an extension of school. I'm going to kick it over to Hedy in just a second. For folks who are interested in learning more about how chatbots paired with Dr. Bergman's best practices research can be used to support kids and to support families and reduce chronic absenteeism this fall, we are happy to take some time to do an assessment of your current interventions practices with you. And to set up that time, you would want to go to bit.ly/eSchool, all lowercase dash AllHere. And some of the things that we would want to know are, what's your current strategy for intervening with families and kids at scale? What technology are you currently using to effectively support families and kids during these times? And what's working well? And you'll walk away with insights and further research about how your current techniques can be positively impacted with the use of AI. For folks who are more so interested in learning more about how AI can be employed in their chronic absence work, you can go to bit.ly/nudge-2020. And what we've created is an ebook that summarizes the research as well as the content that I just shared. And with that, I'm going to kick it over to Hedy.
Thanks so much. Joanna, before you kick it over to me completely, there was a question about how many or which districts are actually using this. I thought maybe you can answer that as I pull up my screen.
Absolutely. So I also saw the question come in. What's an AI platform? AI, when we share the research, is a short form for saying it's artificially able to have these conversations with parents as well as youth. We've gotten interest from over 4,000 school systems across the US to actually have an AI chatbot created to support their chronic absence focused work this fall. As I mentioned, the first ones are rolling out on the East Coast in contexts such as Prince George's County, the Boston Public Schools, and Arundel Schools, and others. And there's a long list of others who are eager to be able to pair Dr. Bergman's best practices research with AI tech to support their families and their kids this year.
So thanks. And I think what this is an example of is how we are all needing to innovate really quickly to be able to respond to these new realities. And a lot of stuff I'll say is getting tested as we speak. There's a complete, build the plane while flying it approach. And I just don't think there's a lot of options for us these days because no one predicted the kind of situation that we are currently in. I want to say, I want to offer up some lessons learned that I think were applied to AllHere as well as other folks who are really think about how to innovate given the crisis that we're experiencing. And I think it helps to put in context the importance of using technology to engage in scalable approaches to meeting the needs of kids. So first of all, as all of you look towards what's happening right now, I want to suggest that it's helpful to think about how do you build upon what you already know as we do this work. So we know that a whole family and child approach matters. So as we think about technology, even use, you're going to think about how to pay attention to social, emotional, as well as academic well-being. And the other importance of thinking about technology and working on this is because we have to find ways to keep families as central partners, because as we move to distance and blended learning, or as we change what school looks like, the importance of having families up to date and abreast of what we're doing is more important than ever. Having positive, clear, and timely communications. Prior to this year, I would have said, what mattered most was getting kids to school the first day of school. And now what I realize is, getting kids to school means they need to know where school is, how is it being held, and how to get on there. There's more information that families need to know now than ever before. Integrating virtual and in-person learning has always been an opportunity so that we can address challenges that kids might face to get to school. And now with everyone facing various challenges, particularly given COVID-19, we have to do that even better. Addressing inequitable access to resources and supports and using absenteeism is especially essential because the impact of COVID-19 is having a more disproportionately challenging impact on some communities than others. And this means, and we can use technology to help us do that, that we really need to think about integrated approaches. For those of you working in schools, this means cutting across family support, academics, student support. It means things like integrating your student information system and your LMS system, which typically might not have taught. And then it's about being able to reach outside schools to other folks, because what the challenges kids and families face to getting school can't be addressed just by schools alone. What we do know that is we can and should continue to use absenteeism because it is both a leading indicator that educational inequities are going to be exacerbated, and it is in itself a cause, because if you're not there to benefit from what's being offered by schools, then the chances of falling behind are huge. We know from prior to COVID-19 that attendance strongly correlates with every outcome we wanted in school. We also know that absenteeism is an early warning that positive conditions for learning are missing. And this holds true. We actually developed this framework with AIR prior to COVID-19, but I think it still holds very true with COVID-19. We know kids and families come to school when they feel physically, emotionally healthy and safe. If we close schools in order to keep families healthy and safe, then when we open schools, we have to find a way to assure them that schools are healthy and safe. And again, your communications about what are the conditions for COVID-19, what are the steps being taken, are going to be critical to that. At the same time, we have to think about how are we using our resources so if schools are being held at a distance, we still create emotional safety, because bullying can still happen. We create ways so that if kids are experiencing challenges like bullying or not feeling a sense of belonging, connection, or support to someone at the school environment, it is easy for kids to reach out or families to reach out and get connected, or for the school system to positively, proactively connect with kids and families so they know that they're supported, they know who they can talk to. We can use technology to make sure that we're gauging how much are kids challenged and engaged. You can do surveys, you can find out from families what's going on, and this all helps us to build relationships. And what we need to be using is technology so that we can get a handle on these things, and then making sure we reserve as much time as possible for human beings to do the very important work of relationship building, which is what really allows us to motivate kids to show up and allow us to unpack What are the challenges? And when we see high levels of absenteeism, we can note, it helps us alert that in that school experiencing those high levels, or those grade levels, or those classrooms, we need to deepen the use of our resources to unpack which of these conditions might not be in place. This is about implementing a systemic approach to reducing chronic absenteeism that includes capacity building and having a team take on this work, actionable data, positive engagement, strategic partnerships, and shared accountability, so that we all see these as challenges that we can work together to address. I'm going to start though, there was a mention earlier in Joanna's comment about how do we use attendance data to inform engagement at scale. And that means that we actually have to have some new data frameworks that allow us to take a more sophisticated approach to understanding whether kids are showing up and why they may not be showing up, and then to target our resources so they get what they need to show up. That means we still can use chronic absence. And your school districts, I know we have some folks internationally, but the folks in the United States should have data prior to school closure that shows how much kids were missing too much school, which were missing 10% or more. You can even notice which kids were missing 20% or more. That data, because kids were experiencing challenges prior to school closure that to getting to school, we know that they are likely to still experience challenges, and it's a sign that they need additional supports. We know that chronic absence in a prior year predicts chronic absence in a future year without intervention. Given what happened during school closure in the spring, I'm pretty sure kids didn't get any kind of, the meaningful intervention was probably pretty limited. And that means that if we want to know who needs support now, we can use our prior data to identify who needs support coming into this new school year. We can also add additional metrics. We can look at, for whom do we have contact information, because we need to reach out to them. And this is also, again, where technology can help. If you have emails, texting, all that going on, you can assess whether or not those are getting through. You can need to examine the connectivity and find out whether kids have the digital access they need, whether that's the devices, the software, or the internet access that allow them to connect into school, especially if we're moving to hybrid and distance learning environments. We need to build a sense of connection and relationships. And this is where, again, we can use our technology both to offer support, but also to make it easy for people to text, connect in personalized ways with families and students. And then we have to monitor participation so we can make sure we can see when kids are showing up and take action when they're not. If a kid stops participating and we have this other data, then we can see what kind of actions we need to take. We worked with a principal in Detroit who, in one case, when a child stopped participating, the problem was that the child had moved in with grandma because they were trying to find a safe place to be during COVID-19. Once they got reestablished contact information, because the grandma was actually having trouble reaching the school because the school had been closed, there wasn't a receptionist answering the phone, they were able to get them, this is last spring, get things back on track. In another case, a mom was an essential worker, and the challenge was that she didn't have time to get her kids into the technology. Once they did the appropriate physically distanced intervention of showing kids how to log on, it was solved. Another kid, unfortunately and sadly, his father had passed away from COVID, and the family was struggling. We need to have easy ways for us to connect with families, check in how they're doing, and families to let us know what's going on, and use the lack of participation as a sign that we have to explore more what's happening. And if we have all this data at our fingertips, we can actually start to think about what are the supports that need to be in place faster. This is information I know we'll make your these slides available later on that you can get in more depth. So I'm not going to go, it gives you ideas about how you can collect this data. And we are actually suggesting that as we move into this next school year, you think about every learning opportunity, whether it's in-person, synchronous, asynchronous, as something you want to document. That's a learning, it's like period attendance. This is a learning opportunity, And I'm gonna know whether the kid participated in it by looking at it in this way. And then you can start to examine how many of those learning opportunities did a child miss, and which kinds of learning opportunities did a student typically miss? Was it all, or students, are they typically missing the synchronous ones? Maybe that's an internet issue. The asynchronous ones, maybe that's a different kind of challenge. These are ways that you can start to examine patterns and also notice which kids are missing 10% or more of school, which we had found from prior to COVID-19 was a real indicator that kids were off track, to see who might need more support. I know we're going to have to come up with new ways of taking attendance. So we have to start to define, what does that look when it's remote synchronous, remote asynchronous, remote course completion, and then start to put this data into our student information systems so that we can look at which students, schools, grades, neighborhoods need more support. This is an example of how you might think about tracking it, where you think about the different modes of synchronous, asynchronous, and noticing who's absent and when they're present, and use that both for problem solving for kids, but if you have this information at scale for groups of students. And we're going to have this in our student information systems so that we can break it down, so we can see which students, which groups are having challenges, and using a combination of qualitative and quantitative information to figure out what's going on. And quantitative information can both be information that is gathered by talking to kids and families. It can also be gathered by surveys so that you can start to unpack. And I think we need to start doing this right now as schools are opening. We have to see, we've never experimented at scale like we have now with a new form of schooling. Whether kids show up or not is our first indication of whether the ship we're building, the plane we're building is even working. If I can't guarantee engagement if kids, kids can show up and you don't always know whether they're learning. But if kids don't show up at all, we know something has gone awry. We have to pay so much attention to this because we are trying so fast to put in place new systems, and we need fast feedback loops. This is an example, by the way, of what it means to take this data, put it into a dashboard that gives meaning. This is actually Oakland, California. This is a school district that had found in its SIS system, they could look at device and internet connectivity and notice which kids had those two things, only had one of them, didn't have either of them, and then look at it by school, because then it helps you both know which schools might need more support, or maybe there's a school that has most of its kids and they might be doing something that's really effective that other schools should consider doing. Ultimately, we actually have to put in place a different kind of tiered support system. Or maybe this is a tiered support, this is always hold true, but COVID-19 has maybe, at least for me, us at Attendance Works, made us reflect about, this isn't just tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, prevention, early intervention, and intensive intervention. We can be using our data to examine whether we have the foundational supports we need to have in place to make sure kids get to school. And by foundational supports, I mean, these are the building blocks of good schools that aren't about attendance, but when you don't have them, kids have challenges showing up. Whether that's homerooms and advisories that create a more personalized learning environment, having a schedule of classes because you just decided to change everything, whether that's the access to tech and equipment, which I think prior to COVID-19, I would not necessarily have realized was such a crucial building block, but it is now. I think it's even things like active engagement of kids and families. We've always known that's important. But with all the challenges happening with COVID-19 and the trauma and the happening, I think families send kids to school when they feel hope about their future, confidence where they're going, a feeling of control. When you feel helpless, like you can't make a difference, it is harder to motivate kids to show up to school. So part of the reason you want active engagement of kids and families in problem solving is they'll help make sure we come up with the right solutions, but by engaging them, they feel some control and agency in this environment where we all feel such a loss of control. So how we work together to plan for a different future is part of those foundational supports. And when you see high levels of poor attendance happening, non-participation happening, we have to ask the question, is part of the problem we don't have a central building block in place? And that it's not just an individual kid solution to put it in place. It's about working together as a system, as a community, to put a building block in place. And then we also still have to think about our tiers of support. And this is where I think systems like what we're talking about with AllHere and other forms of taking technology and having communications at scale can happen. How do we make sure we have clear, concise communications about schedules and expectations? I feel so much sympathy for families who have multiple kids, for whom they're trying to figure out what their schedule is and what does it mean to get back to school. Parents can help with that, but we gotta know when school is to help with that. Creating predictable weeks routines. This is actually connected to what Joanna said about making things fun. We still have to have schools be an engaging, warm place where we feel a sense of connection. That's what helps motivate. And if we can use technology to take that at scale, make it easier, then we should do that. And that can be both a bot, can also be how we do messaging, make it easier for a teacher to send a single text message to all the kids in our classrooms. How do we also make sure that we are connecting, checking on wellness, checking on connectivity, and then making sure we can quickly connect in and provide other supports. And ultimately, we have to think through how can we then think about who should be involved in which level and how we can leverage our technology, because we're asking so much of our teachers, so much of our school staff, that we really need to use technology to make, to offload what we can so they can engage in the high touch human relationship building. So with that, Joanna, I am turning it back to you. And Joanna, you are muted, so you need to
thank
unmute.
you for that. So we have just a few minutes left. Hedy, thank you so much. I want to start by answering a couple of the questions that have come up in the Q&A column. And while I'm doing this, this is your friendly reminder to get your questions in by clicking the Q&A button that is on your screen. And those questions can either be for Hedy or myself, okay? So many awesome ones have come in so far. As a quick reminder, someone asked, are we gonna get the PowerPoint and a recording? Yes, you will receive that within the next 48 hours to the email that you use to sign up for this call. Someone asked, what was the name of Dr. Bergman's research? The short form of it is at ednudge.com. So ednudge.com. That is where you can find a direct link to that study as well as the research. EdNudge was acquired by AllHere back earlier in May. So if you're looking for a way to actually implement Dr. Bergman's work, you want to come to allhere.com. Someone asked a question, what does a district need to do to customize their chatbot? The AllHere team actually does that for you based on your existing documentation and conversations that we have during the onboarding process. Another question that came in, we have a very diverse school with over 25 different nations. Is it able to be used with more than one language? The answer is yes. So we are available in multiple languages, and either a school, either an independent school or an entire school system can use this, okay? It doesn't need to just be through your school system. Two more questions. Are AllHere and Attendance Works the same organization? No. So Hedy has been super generous to come and share her time this afternoon. Attendance Works gives very valuable TA as well as resources and consultative work to school systems who are seeking to tackle issues with absences. And their website is attendanceworks.com. I'm gonna switch my screen share, keep those questions coming in. I am gonna hang on the line for folks who have more. just giving a bit more context about AllHere for the folks who've asked for it, designed for remote and on-site contexts, as well as hybrid to support your youth and to support your families where they are. And the chatbot AI. So AllHere is the only organization that has created a chatbot to support chronic absence work. We are happy to answer any other questions or answers that have come in the meantime. Everybody, thank you so much for taking time out of your afternoon to learn and converse with us. As was shared at the top of the call, you will receive a copy of the presentation and the slides within the next 48 hours or so, and we are here to help for anything that you might need. Thanks again.
Thank you, Joanna. I'm just going to step back in real quick.
Go for it.
We're just past the top of the hour, so we're going to go ahead and wrap things up. Again, if we didn't get to your questions today, someone from AllHere will be in contact with you directly. I'd like to thank our presenters today for a very informative presentation. And I'd also like to thank the audience members for joining us as well. As Joanna said, in about 48 hours, you'll get an email with a PDF of the slides and a link to the recording. And with that, thanks for participating, and have a wonderful day.